Joining us now to discuss former Labor Secretary nominee and former Chief Executive Officer of CKE Restaurants, Andy Puzder. Andy, great to see you. We'll get into oil and gas in a moment, but I want to talk about inflation overall and the fact that we're slipping on growth. We just got a revision of the GDP figures for the first quarter. We thought it was 1.3% down, which is bad enough. Turns out it's 1.5% down, which is much worse. It looks like we're in the midst of stagflation.
We are in the midst of stagflation. And even more importantly, I think the American people are already sensing stagflation. Even if, I don't know if the numbers are there yet or not. We're going to have to wait for the government to report them. But you talk to just about anybody. If somebody trying to buy gas or trying to buy food, trying to take care of their family and pay the bills, they're feeling stagflation today. So whether it's technically here or not may not be as important as whether or not people are living it.
You know, it's a fancy term, but demand destruction is what's going on here. And just a very concrete example of that comes from your old business, the restaurant business. I went to a restaurant last night. My sister-in-law is in town. My wife and my sister-in-law went out. We went to the same place a few months back. It was $200 for the three of us. It's a pricey place, but last night it was $300. I mean, it's a 33% increase. Made us wonder, maybe we should stay home and just buy a nicer bottle of wine than we could get at the restaurant. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of double thinking. Should I really spend this much for a night out in the town, or even less than that, a fancy steak instead of hamburger?
Well, you're not the only person thinking that. And if we look at the numbers, you see that savings, the amount of money that people have in savings accounts has come way down, while credit card debt has gone way up. There's going to come a point where credit card debt is super high and savings are super low. And then you're going to see people really cutting back on the kind of activities they've been engaging in since the pandemic ended, with all the government money that people had. And that's going to have a very devastating effect on businesses, particularly restaurants and smaller restaurants, the restaurants that are, one-ofs in cities, probably like the one you ate steak at. This is going to be a problem. These are people that survived the pandemic. Are they going to survive Biden's economic policies post-pandemic? That's a tough one.
Well, and his policies specifically oriented to try to fix the problem are at least not doing anything, if not having a perverse effect, making it all worse. This letter from the Republicans to Jennifer Granholm, the Energy Secretary, reads, I'm just going to read a bit of it. It says, the American people deserve to know more about DOE's plan to backfill the SPR. That's the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that they've been taking a lot of oil out of and selling it, mostly overseas, by the way. The SPR is intended for emergency supply chain disruptions, not as a stopgap to make up for the Biden administration's war on domestic policy. And we're going to have to refill that, by the way, at prices that were much higher than when we bought the oil at. We're selling it overseas, even though it's meant to be used here, and it's not bringing down the price of oil. So it's failing on at least three fronts, if not more.
Well, of course it's not bringing down the price of oil. Oil prices go down when the world anticipates there's going to be an increase in the supply of oil. A temporary release from a strategic energy reserve isn't going to convince the world that that's the case. You need to, if America were granting permits, new leases, building pipelines, encouraging banks to lend to oil industry companies as opposed to discouraging them. If Biden stood on the steps of the White House and said, we're back in the oil business, the oil's going to start to flow, prices would come down. That's not what he's doing. He tried. First of all, he doesn't want to do it. He's now said we're in this incredible transition to some new kind of economy where we won't be using oil. I guess the idea of blaming the pandemic, blaming Trump, blaming Putin, blaming the war in the Ukraine, none of that, blaming price gouging, none of that worked. So now we're going to head to an economy, transition to an economy, I guess, where we won't have fuel to drive our cars, heat our homes, air condition our home, or food to feed our families. Well, this is the Biden economy.
You know, Andy, he's not even consistent on that, though, because then he goes to these dirty producers like Iran, or even worse, Venezuela, in terms of the filth with which they produce their oil product, instead of coming home, instead of doing it here. And rather than encouraging domestic production, the Democrats have this new price gouging bill. So they continue to attack on the regulatory front, on this particular front, putting price controls in, which of course create more shortages. Again, they're doing exactly the opposite of what will help the average American consumer.
Well, the interesting thing is that when Biden sells oil, when the government sells oil from the Strategic Energy Reserve, guess what they sell it for? They sell it for the market price, just like the oil companies that they accuse of gouging.
Yes.
So and then the reason they're bringing in oil from places like Venezuela and Iran and Russia, any place they can bring it in from, is supposedly the United States, is they're trying to show that they're cutting production in the United States to keep the Democrats voting and bring oil in to try and keep gas prices down to get everybody else to vote for them. And it's not working. Nobody's fooled.
Yeah, and by the way, Venezuela doesn't have the oil. They produce about 700,000 barrels a day. They use about 600,000 barrels in country. And we're hoping to get 1 million barrels. The only way we can get more oil from Venezuela is by going in there and helping them to produce more oil. So we're helping a terribly dirty foreign oil company run by a dictator, by the way, and screwing our own people. I mean, it's really un-American. The whole thing is. Well, hopefully we'll work it out. We are great. The American people are great. The American entrepreneurs are great. We will figure out a way to get through this. Yeah. But it won't happen through the government. That's for damn sure.
Will not.
Andy Puzder, good to see you. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much.